Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Founded in 1836 and designed by Scottish architect John Notman, this was the nation's second major rural cemetery. With its rolling landscape, horticultural plantings, and eclectic architecture, it offered a romantic alternative to the crowded urban environment. Overlooking the Schuylkill River, 3.5 miles north of Center City, it had grown by 1861 to 78 acres. This cemetery was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1998. From its inception, Laurel Hill was intended as a civic institution designed for public use. In an era before public parks and museums, it was a multi-purpose cultural attraction where the general public could experience the art and refinement previously known only to the wealthy. Laurel Hill contains more than 33,000 monuments and more than 11,000 family lots. Cemeteries eventually became areas of recreation. In 1812, Philly banned burials in public squares. John J. Smith conceived the idea of Laurel Hill when he was frustrated by trying to locate his daughter Maria's grave at a different cemetery and inspired him to create Laurel Hill Cemetery. He found it impossible to designate the resting place of my darling daughter. She was reburied in 1837 and then moved again to West Laurel Hill after Smith's death in 1881. John Sims originally owned the land that Laurel Hill currently sits on. Laurel Hill Cemetery is the third rural cemetery in the U.S. It has beautiful panoramic views of Schuylkill River. It was chosen since the location was far enough outside the city, but close enough for funeral processions. John Notman, a Scottish-born American architect, designed Laurel Hill. Plan of the walks and avenues of Laurel Hill Cemetery. William Strickland, architect. The first burial at Laurel Hill Cemetery was Mercy Carlyle in 1836. In 1848, Laurel Hill North ran out of room. The cemetery then bought Laurel Hill South for $13,000, which consisted of 27 acres. James Sidney laid the south section out. The south was not physically connected and had separate records, office and superintendents. In 1861, before Central Laurel Hill was created, North and South Laurel Hill were separated. Central Laurel Hill was started and also houses Millionaires Row. In 1899, superintendent cottages were demolished and the three-superintendent system was ended. The original superintendent's cottage had an oriental appearance but was based on English suburban house types of the day. Designed by John Notman, it likely flattered the tastes of Nathan Dunn, who, in addition to underwriting the cemetery, was the famed proprietor of Philadelphia's Chinese Museum. Circa 1910. At various times, greenhouses stood in every section of Laurel Hill. By the 20th century, however, with grave space at a premium, the greenhouses were located only in central Laurel Hill, near today's Valley View section. The Friends of Laurel Hill Cemetery was formed in 1978 to revive the dilapidated cemetery. The main missions of the Friends of Laurel Hill Cemetery are to 1. Prepare, implement and promote educational programming, public outreach initiatives and research resources that emphasize the historical, aesthetic, architectural and cultural significance of Laurel Hill Cemetery. 2. Foster and support the restoration and preservation of the cemetery's monuments, statuary, historic gatehouse and grounds. 3. Raise funds and seek contributed services to accomplish these goals. The creation of Fairmount Park had dire consequences for Laurel Hill. The cemetery was confined by the park and the river with no new vacant land to be had for expansion. The Fairmount Park Commission actually took some of Laurel Hill's land by eminent domain. Fairmount Park provided Philadelphians with a grand municipal park to replace their rural cemetery. Aerial view of Laurel Hill Cemetery. By the 20th century, not only was the cemetery approaching capacity, but the surrounding neighborhoods had grown and developed. When rural cemeteries began to fall out of favor after the Civil War, one of the complaints against them was that they were too cluttered. The new landscape lawn plan, developed by Spring Grove Cemetery's Adolph Strauch, advocated open lawns and fewer monuments. Laurel Hill could not expand and was running out of room. It purchased West Laurel Hill in 1869 and it followed the less cluttered form. In 1874 Smith resigned from the Laurel Hill board. At West Laurel Hill, funeral processions arrived via the railroad. Initially, the Pencoed station was the stop for processions journeying to the cemetery, but later, a station was built along the Pennsylvania Railroad specifically for West Laurel Hill. In 1998, Laurel Hill Cemetery was designated a National Historic Landmark. John J. Smith. The driving force behind the creation of Laurel Hill and West Laurel Hill cemeteries, Smith was a librarian, publisher, and horticulturist. He supervised plantings at both cemeteries, served as president of the board of managers and wrote the early Laurel Hill guidebooks and monument pattern books. Mercy Carlisle. The first burial in Laurel Hill Cemetery. Henry Charles Lee. A very impressive memorial is the one for Lee, a publisher and influential historian that specialized in the Middle Ages. When he died, his library was passed on to the University of Pennsylvania. In 1926 his library was the most complete collection of medieval European documents within the United States. The collection contains approximately 7,000 volumes. The Muse of History was sculpted by Alexander Sterling Calder in 1989. Joseph Wharton. Quaker Wharton was a businessman and industrialist who made his fortune as co-founder of the Bethlehem Steel Company. Wharton also co-founded Swarthmore College, and in 1881, he set aside $100,000 to endow a business school at the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School. Wharton State Forest in New Jersey was also named after him. George K. Smith. The Philadelphia origins of the pharmaceutical giant now known as GlaxoSmithKline date to the 1830s, when druggist Smith opened a store selling drugs, paints and chemicals. In 1841, John's brother George joined him and the business grew, becoming a leading drug wholesaler. When John died, George continued in the business, employing advanced methods like catering directly to the precise requirements of physicians. He also focused on offering pure, quality products. In 1846, he began supplying medicine to the U.S. Army. Smith died in 1864. He and several members of his company are buried in Laurel Hill Cemetery. Henry Siebert. In 1873, Siebert commissioned the casting of a bell made of metal from cannons from the Revolutionary and Civil Wars. The bell was placed in Independence Hall, where it remains today. An ardent believer in modern spiritualism, Siebert left a bequest to the University of Pennsylvania to fund a study of spiritualism and endow a professorship in moral philosophy in honor of his late father. Robert Taylor Conrad. He was born in Philadelphia in 1810. He worked as a writer and editor for Graham's magazine, where he edited the works of Edgar Allan Poe and others. He later served a short term as mayor of Philadelphia from 1854 to 1856. Conrad's lot, located in Section 14, was donated by cemetery managers. William J. Mullen. One of the most distinctive memorials in South Laurel Hill was erected by philanthropist and prison agent Mullen, the prisoner's friend. The memorial, first shown at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876, was both admired and ridiculed. A marble door, made to look like the entrance to Moormensing prison, is partially open. A weeping woman sits just outside the door. Mullen stands on a pedestal. A bat, an owl, a bulldog, a set of open handcuffs and a weeping woman clinging to a cross were all originally part of this complicated sculpture. While some of the details of the memorial have been lost over time, it still inspires both positive and negative reactions from visitors. Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride. In 1844, Kirkbride became superintendent of the Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane. During his tenure, Kirkbride influenced the treatment of the mentally ill in the United States. He advocated humane and moral treatment for the insane, and his Kirkbride plan was adopted by asylums across the United States. He was a founder of the Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane, today's American Psychiatric Association. William Emlyn Cresson. This monument, located in the Stoever Tract, catches your eye. He was a lover of art but died at the young age of 24. His parents established the Cresson Prize at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is still awarded today. Joseph A. Bailey was the sculptor. Inscription: March 15, 1843, August 9, 1868. William Emlyn Cresson, only child of Emlyn and Priscilla P. Cresson, born March 15, 1843, died August 9, 1868. A lover of art, his estate was given to endow a fund for the support in Europe of art students of merit. Sarah Joseph Hale. Hale edited Godey's Lady's Book from 1837 to 1877, but she is best remembered today as the writer of Mary Had a Little Lamb, and as the mother of Thanksgiving for her efforts to make the holiday a national celebration. Hale was also a forceful proponent for girls' education and actively supported the newly opened Vassar College. Sarah Joseph Hale, daughter of Sarah Joseph Hale. Robert Cornelius, photography pioneer. A chemist and metallurgist, he became involved in the nascent practice of photography in the 1830s. Through experiments with vapor of bromide and silver plating, he was able to reduce considerably the exposure time needed to create a photograph. In October 1839, this allowed him to sit for the first successful self-portrait, producing the first of what is now popularly called today a selfie. He operated a photography studio in the 1840s, but abandoned it for a more lucrative career in the gaslighting industry. His first self-portrait was lost and obscure until it was found for the 1875 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. George Childs. Publisher, newspaperman, philanthropist. As a teenager, he came to Philadelphia and found work in a bookstore. He later became a partner in the publishing house of Childs and Peterson. He managed the publication of the Arctic expedition of fellow Philadelphian Elisha Kent Kane. When Peterson retired, Childs partnered with J.B. Lippincott, but within a year, he withdrew from the partnership and returned to his own publishing house. In 1864, Childs, along with the Drexels, Francis A. and Anthony J., purchased the Public Ledger. Under Childs' direction, the newspaper became highly respected and recognized for its responsibly documented attacks on war profiteering and monopolies. Childs provided burial ground at Woodlands Cemetery for members of the Ledger's typographical union at Philadelphia's Woodlands Cemetery. He also opened a home for union printers in Colorado. He built the country mansion Wootton in Bryn Mawr, but also built a clean, small, suburban town, with wide streets and affordable housing for people with modest incomes. Wayne, Pennsylvania, one of the country's first planned suburban communities, was the result of Childs' partnership with Anthony J. Drexel. In later years, he wrote his Recollections in 1890 and Recollections of General Grant in 1885. Childs was a founding trustee of the Drexel Institute of Technology, now Drexel University. He continued as a trustee until his death. William F. Hughes. Seated overlooking the Schuylkill River is the likeness of Hughes. This bronze sculpture by Joseph A. Bailey is one of the few depictions of an actual person in Laurel Hill. Hughes owned the Southwark Hay Market, at one time the largest of its kind in the United States. Edwin Henry Fittler. The tallest obelisk in Laurel Hill belongs to Philadelphia Mayor Fittler. Fittler made his fortune as a cordage manufacturer. He was a well-liked employer and businessman who served as Philadelphia's mayor from 1887 to 1891. In 1888, he was nominated for the office of President of the United States by the Philadelphia delegation at the Republican Convention. He was the first mayor of Philadelphia to be elected to a 4-year term under Philadelphia's then new city charter. Mayors had previously served a 1, 2, or 3-year term. Fittler was the first Philadelphia mayor to occupy offices in the new, and current, City Hall. Though he moved up in society, Fittler never forgot his roots. He was a contributor and officer of the Kensington Soup Society. General Robert Patterson. He was a veteran of the War of 1812, the Mexican War and the Civil War. Patterson was born in Ireland and came to America in 1799. He received much criticism after the First Battle of Bull Run, and due to his actions, he was mustered out of the army in July of 1861. Patterson's monument documents his military service, as it depicts a lion sitting atop armaments. An inscription gives the dates of Patterson's service. Francis Patterson. One of the most distinct monuments in central Laurel Hill is that of Civil War General Francis E. Patterson. The sculpture, by Joseph A. Bailey, shows a half-nude female holding a funeral urn. During the Civil War, Patterson faced criticism and a possible sanction after he withdrew his troops from their posts without authorization. Prior to the start of the inquiry, Patterson was found dead in his tent, and while the gunshot wound was ruled accidental, rumors of suicide persisted. Henry Diston. In the 1840s, Diston founded the company that would become one of the largest handsaw manufacturers in the United States. Diston's manufacturing plant occupied 64 acres in the Tacony section of Philadelphia. Known as a generous employer, Diston worked to improve the workers' community surrounding his factory by building employee housing, a school, and a library. The Diston Mausoleum, it is the largest private above-ground mausoleum in Laurel Hill. The Diston Mausoleum is the final resting place of Henry and Mary Steelman Diston and their descendants. A native of New Jersey, Mary Diston secretly built and furnished a house in Atlantic City for her husband. He liked Atlantic City so much that he bought more property and helped turn the town into a shore destination. William Warner. Among the most distinctive memorials in Laurel Hill is the monument marking the lot of coal magnate William Warner. While little is known all about Warner, His memorial is a notable example of American funerary art. Carved in granite by Scottish sculptor Alexander Milne Calder, the Warner Monument features a female figure and an open casket. The figure's arms are now missing, but originally, one hand was pointing to heaven, and the other was pointing at the sarcophagus, to Warner's escaping soul. A similar monument in marble stands opposite the Calder work. Harry Berwyn Memorial Aspiration. Businessman. Berwyn was the vice president of the Berwyn White Coal Company led by his brother, Edward J. Berwyn. The company mined bituminous coal. A member of the Fashionable Art Club of Philadelphia. He was married to Lily Margaret Graham. His given name was Henry, though he almost exclusively used Harry. Berwyn Memorial Aspiration, constructed in 1933. The memorial for Harry Berwyn is the granite version of Harriet Whitney Frishmuth's bronze aspiration sculpture. Frishmuth, who is also buried in Laurel Hill Cemetery, was born in Philadelphia in 1880. She studied in Paris and Berlin before returning to America. Frishmuth had a long and successful career and died in 1980. Harry Killer's Monument. An edition of Laurel Hill's rejuvenation came in 2009 with the unexpected death of legendary Phillies broadcaster Harry Killer's. His family chose to purchase property in Laurel Hill Cemetery because they wanted the nicest, most iconic cemetery in Philadelphia. They chose a beautiful spot overlooking the Schuylkill River. Today, seats from Veterans Stadium flank the microphone monument to Philadelphia's beloved sports announcer.
The men and women of our fire departments, our police departments, our emergency rescue squads. We are all Americans and we are proud to be Americans. And we must never resort to...
I just want to say one thing to my wife who's home. Yo, Adrian! I did it!
You know, I could have done nothing without you. Yo, Adrian, we did it. We did.
Adrian Balboa. Used as the site of Adrian's grave in Rocky Balboa, and later as Paulie's final resting place next to his sister in Creed. This old and revered cemetery is the final resting place of many a famous name, including one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. After the filming, the production crew left Adrian's heavy granite grave marker behind at the cemetery, and since then it has actually been publicly displayed on the grounds. The stone, now covered in green moss, is so realistic that many visitors have mistaken it for the real thing.